Mr. Dorschel?
Here.
Mr. Ganser?
Here.
Mr. Stein?
Here.
Ms. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Humberg?
Here.
Chair Bussey and Ms. Fox are excused.
All right, item 3 is approval of the minutes from September 26th. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
A second?
Second.
All right, any additions or deletions or edits? Mr. Humberg.
One on page 3, 2/3 of the way down, it starts Mr. Homburg explain, impervious surface requirements and window dressing for addressing water quality issues. Could you please add in this case? I in no way, shape, or form meant impervious is window dressing. I said it for what we're trying to do here, it was window dressing. And at the end, the second to last sentence, when it talks about there's a large amount of clay soil and shallow groundwater, please add in bedrock and adjacency to the lake, which are all factors in it.
All right, other edits? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes are approved. And is there anybody here that wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close the appearance section. And due to some applicants here, we'd like to take a few things out of order if that's okay, so we can get some folks that are here visiting on their way. So we can move on to 6A, which is a public hearing regarding the proposed floodplain map and ordinance amendment resulting from construction of the Madison Metropolitan Sewage District Pump Station 18 at 1000 East Broadway as required by section 13.210 of the MOC. And Sunny, will you kick us off what we need?
Sure. So Carla Fisher is here from AECom, representing the applicant MMSD, Madison Metropolitan Sewage District. This is regarding the recent completion of construction of MMSD's Pumping Station 18. And our consultant engineer, Darren Pope from Bierbecker, provided a review of the requirements of the ordinance and the process that was included in your packets. Darren was going to be here tonight but is ill, so I'll let Carla kick off the technical details.
Sure. My name is Carla Fisher. I'm from AECom in Middleton, 1350 Deming Way. So we completed hydraulic analysis of fill that was placed in the floodplain in order to construct the Pumping Station 18. It was conditionally approved by FEMA back in 2012, actually, April 12, 2012. I think we had 2015, but that was a typo. And we received as-built data after the pumping station was built, and we went back, reanalyzed the, the project from a hydraulic perspective, and found that there was no increase to the base flood elevation, so that's the 1% chance flood elevation. There were some mapping changes. We did a little bit more detailed analysis based on FEMA's comments, and so there was no mapped floodway in the area prior to our analysis. And based on our analysis, we saw that we could actually narrow the floodway in that area. So the floodway is the area that's required to convey the base flood. The floodplain is the floodway plus the flood fringe. The flood fringe is kind of like a slack water area. So really the change is just a mapping change. We went through all the public, we notified all the property owners, and then FEMA went ahead and approved everything in August. So I think from our perspective, that's kind of the technical background. If you have technical questions, I can answer those. I think tonight we want to go through the process of moving forward with amending the ordinance to adopt the new FEMA firm. So it's the flood insurance rate now.
All right, and if there are no questions at this part, we can move on and close out the public hearing regarding this item and move on to item 6B, which is the consideration of recommendation to the City Council regarding the proposed floodplain map and ordinance amendment resulting from this. Now we can move on to if there are specific questions from committee members.
Looks good.
All right. It does sound like a formality, that's for sure. Would someone be willing to make a motion?
Move approval of the resolution as drafted by staff.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Item passes. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to 6C, which is the public hearing on request by LaRae Richard, the Cozy Home, for a zoning permit and facade improvement grant application for the property at 6328 Monona Drive. And if you could do an overview of this in case someone shows up for the public hearing piece, and then we'll move in.
My name is Leah Hernandez. I'm actually representing my mom, LaRae Richard. We are business partners on the Cozy Home. We're currently in Madison at 4100 Monona Drive, but we purchased the building at 6328 Monona Drive, and we are applying for the facade grant to make it a little bit prettier. Our plans currently are to add a more customer-friendly retail facade, including changing the siding, making the door more of a French-style door, and changing some of the windows. That's just the overview of this. As you can see in the plans, there's a lot more work that needs to be done than that, but.
All right, and if there's no one here for the public hearing section, we can close item 6C and go on to 6D, which is a pre-hearing conference for the same item and request for the zoning permit and facade improvement grant. Sunny, will you kick us off with that discussion?
This is a pre-hearing conference, no action is recommended. It's intended to familiarize the commission with the plans and allow the plan commission a chance to request revisions or more information from the applicant. So I've listed topics for discussion in the zoning permit, in the staff report, including the zoning and the use of the building, and specifically looking at the option that was noted in the plans for a potential second story. At this time, that's not included in the plans. The applicant might wish to comment on the status of that. If it is going to be moving forward, we should note what the use is of the second story, if it's residential, if there are enough parking spaces and other zoning impacts like that. The second point is the Plan Commission should make a determination of whether these improvements are eligible under the facade improvement grant program. The applicants are making a request for the full grant amount of $10,000, making improvements close to $50,000. So it's a 50% matching grant up to a maximum of $10,000. There's some notes on landscaping and lighting, signage, and notes from city department heads from the fire chief, including that an alarm system is required, a Knox box is required. The police chief suggested security cameras for the retail use. And again, if the second story does move forward, then a sprinkler might be needed, but at this time the fire chief said that it would not be required.
All right. Committee members?
So this application does not include the second floor in the renderings?
Correct. As of right now, we just included in the drawings the dormers to go for the look that we're going for. We haven't committed to a second story. If we are going to move forward with the second story, obviously there's a lot of details that we have yet to work out. But it would be just residential, maximum of 2 apartments. It's just an idea that we kind of tossed around, but we wanted to make note of it.
So what we're reviewing is this one-story elevation on the top of this?
The one-story elevation on the top of that drawing is the existing building. That drawing, I'm not sure why my mom included that, but it was a quick rendering done by our architect to give us a couple of different options to choose from, and we did choose one of those options, which resulted in the final drawing.
Could we get the camera on, if you can hear me in the back?
I apologize, but I'm confused. So
I would be too.
Second story is not part of this application. What is?
Maybe we'll hold until we can get it up there for the thousands of viewers.
Yeah.
To make sure that they are seeing what we're talking
Hear
about.
that rumble outside?
Yeah.
It's everybody's, kind of.
And lacking thousands of viewers, at least everybody could look at the same thing, point to it at the same time.
Yeah.
So
There you go. All correct?
This drawing here, this first one is the existing building and how it's currently laid out. And then these two were examples drawn up by our architect for our deciding. We picked this second option here. And then the color renderings that you have in front of you are a color version with more detail of that second drawing.
Which is
This.
But I thought that,
Yeah.
so
and-
that's not the second story you're referencing. You're saying the facade improvement includes putting on a pitched roof.
Correct, with, I guess those would be kind of faux windows right now. Tentatively, that's how we would want it to look.
You're not finishing off the second floor at this time, that's what you're saying.
Correct.
Any questions? Start down here, Griff. Do you have any other questions?
So,
Yeah. Kathy?
okay, so if I have this right, the middle picture to the left is when you moved in and you are completed, this is what it will look like.
Yeah. Whether that, the upper part that we're looking at right here is an actual second story, or whether it's just a fake facade, that is how it's going to end up looking.
Chris?
A couple things I think clearly qualifies for the amount of work they're doing. It's a great upgrade to the building. I think it's very nice compared to what's there right now. It would be nice to see second floor, but I'm not sure you have the parking for it. I think you've got, what, a half a dozen stalls?
We have 8 stalls in the front, and we have a couple in the back for,
Where?
or we will be putting a couple in the back for
Where?
employees. Behind the building, there's an actual gravel.
You don't have access to that though right now. There's no access easement. You can get there right now, but that lot is, I mean, I happen to know this, but it's probably a redevelopment project.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that there'll be access there. When
Yeah.
that gravel was put in, it was quite a few years ago, it was here, he wanted to add a loading dock, and we explained to the building owner at the time that, you know, he didn't have access, but he said, I'm just gonna use this as long as I can, and then where your back door is, you can see where the loading dock was actually gonna eventually close in, and you put that back door in. So.
We're hopeful that we can figure out a parking solution. We've got a couple of different things that we're looking into, and we are aware of the easement, and we're aware of the,
I think your use is great for the parking, because the dance studio just never had enough parking. With that site empty, it worked out great, but when that site was full, they always had parking for us. I remember
Right.
the days, in fact, the former owner at one time put a curb through there, so we couldn't even drive through there. And that was taken out with the Monona Drive rebuild, so it's just something you need to think about. Your use, I'm not sure, I'm not going to tell you, but I don't think you have a lot of cars at once generally, do you?
correct.
And so with your use, depending on who your tenant is, I see you have a tenant space there, right?
Yeah,
So it'll depend on your tenant as far as how much parking you really have. It's just something to keep in mind if you're thinking about a second floor, then that might affect how many
Yeah.
spots might be available for that tenant.
yeah, and the second floor might just not be feasible, once we kind of get to the finer details of it.
Sure.
And we were aware that it was, there was little parking when we
Yeah.
bought the building, and, yeah, I mean, you are correct that our current space, we're in a mall, so there's plenty of parking, but at any given point, however many customers are in our store, we don't, eight seems like it'll fit the bill.
Yeah, I think it's, as far as the use goes, it's a great use for that building where we have a lot of these on the Monona Drive. We have a really big building on a lot with very little parking, and I think in this case it would be a great fit
Right,
for that site.
awesome.
Others? Yeah, go for it.
I, with all due respect to the applicant and quite honestly to the city of Monona, I'm not a big fan of this facade grant. And I think as we discussed parking and the use of the building, I think this, obviously I believe this is an appropriate time for me to bring up that I think the continued facade improvements to facilities like this on Monona Drive postpones the badly needed redevelopment of Monona Drive. And as we continue to pursue these small buildings with no parking and their, in this case, facade grants, we're never going to have the opportunity for best use real estate on Monona Drive. So though my comments are not directly related to this, I wanted to insert them. I'm having a real problem with these.
All right, other feedback for the applicant or questions? Kathy?
Well, I am delighted that you guys are going to stay in Monona. I don't know how many of you shop there besides me, but I shop there. And it's a wonderful business because it repurposes furniture. It is destination oriented and it draws people there. I mean, and right now they're down on Lake Edge, but I'm delighted that you're going to go there. I wish you had more parking because I think it is going to be a challenge when you want to put a tenant in there who can do that. And if you can get some kind of easement with one of your neighbors to allow your employees at least to park there. But it is a great use, and I'm glad to see and the building updated. And in terms of the facade grant, you know, the difficulty is by the time it's going to be 30 years before we get down to that end of the drive because we're already up trying to do that end, and we're doing the triangle. And so in the meantime, it's nice to see some improvement to me on that end of the drive, and I think this is, of all of the facade grants I've seen come through, this is one of the better uses of the money, I think, and it's a great match. So I'm quite thrilled because I don't want to drive to the west side to go shop there. I'd like to shop in Monona.
All right, other questions or feedback for the applicant? None?
I think it's a good use of the funds, and I would echo the comments about the parking, and I could handcuff you in what you're able to do with tenant space and the possible apartment, but that's not what you're here for today, so I think it's a great use and it'd be a good improvement.
All right, and we will then see you back at, hang on.
Just want to echo what Kathy said, thrilled to see you in Monona. It's the awesome to see your business there. I love the small retailers on Monona Drive. You bring a different energy and vibrancy to Monona Drive.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We are super excited to be coming to Monona too. Super excited.
Excellent. Thank you. And I believe you'll be back then at our next meeting, which should be in a couple weeks, and then we'll be able to get to some actionable items. All right, thank you. So we'll close out item 6D and go back up, and I believe this is why Mary was here, so hopefully she'll make it back. But we'll go on to 5A, which was the Plan Commission review and recommendations to the City Council on the recodification summary by the General Code regarding land use legislation sections of the Monona Municipal Code of Ordinances.
Just a quick note on process. We do have some time to continue discussing this if you like. We don't have to take immediate action on the grading tonight, and I expect that we'll be discussing the other items that we started at the next meeting as well, including the impervious surface regulations. So this memo is only regarding grading. The CDA was aware of the discussion and concerns about the impact of the regulations on the CDA's goals for attracting families to Monona and encouraging remodeling and redevelopment of single-family homes. So they wish to add their input on these regulations, and they won't meet again until October 25th. So that gives us that little additional time to talk about these things one more time. Starting with grading, at the last meeting, we talked about what I've summarized in option number 1, which was tying the first floor directly to the street grade. I believe the consensus was that this is not feasible due to the extreme variation in topography throughout the city. And so the direction from the Plan Commission led to the drafting of option number 2, which ties the finished grade of the house, which triggers Plan Commission review based on the size of the construction project. So I've listed some staff concerns there, including that I don't feel that the size of the home is a good way to regulate grade. There's not necessarily a direct correlation between the size of the construction project and its negative impact on grade. We don't know if a 700 square foot addition versus a 1,200 square foot addition is going to have a worse impact than the other. And I feel that it's an additional burden for property owners. If someone with a small home, for example, wants to put on an addition and update it, they shouldn't be unfairly burdened to bring that home up to more modern standards than someone who has a larger lot. There are also some additional legal concerns that I can go into from the city attorney if necessary. But my favorite option was number 4 on the back of the memo. And this gives a few different options. It ties the finished floor of the house to one of 3 options, and it's the greater of the following. Either 2 feet above the crown of the lowest adjoining street, or number 2, the elevation of the previous structure, or the average of elevations of adjacent homes, whichever is less. So the wording of number 2 as written is a little bit confusing, and I was thinking about that a little bit more today. I don't think there is a need to have those 2 items tied together, the previous structure and the average elevation of adjacent homes. I believe it could be separated out into 3 and achieve the same results. I borrowed this example from another community, and they were tied together for reasons that I'm not aware of. Open it up to discussion.
Chris?
I agree on 1, we talked about that. 2 probably doesn't look good. My favorite so far is 3, but reworded. And I'm not sure why we're so focused on where first floor was, because first floor doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the grade changes. And a lot of these grade changes we're looking at aren't because of first floor, it's because they're trying to elevate it to get that 34 feet or whatever. So it seems to me, I thought about this a lot, that I know what we're really trying to do is keep the grade changes. If there's going to be a significant grade change, then we want to see it. How does it affect everybody? So if we took number 3 under the draft ordinance language and just said the difference between the established natural grade of the property and the finished grade, and then strike a bunch, shall not exceed 2 feet. Why are we interjecting the first floor or the second floor or the third floor, anything into it? So if we had the difference between the established natural grade of the property and the finished grade shall not exceed, we pick that number, 2 feet, 18 inches, whatever it is, but then we would, again, on that one, I believe we'd have to give Plan Commission more leeway than 4 feet. Your example on Tony Waffle, where they actually dug in a garage that met the street and it fit the lot perfectly, is an example of they shouldn't have to go to ZBA to be able to build that house. But what we're really trying to do is keep them from making a severe grade change on the property, because that's what's affecting the neighbors. That's what's affecting, I guess, impacting a lot of the issues with this. So for me, get the finished floor out of there. We don't really want to regulate that, because in a lot of cases they could do a rebuild, and if they're not, say they have a side slope, they're not making a substantial change to the grade, but they'll have their finished floor on one side meet fairly well. By the time you get to the other side of the lot, they can have a half exposed basement with windows there. Or they might have the driveway on the lower side. So anytime we start tying the house into the road in Monona, I think is a problem because of all our grades. I mean, that one's just right out the window. You had a lot of examples, and I could dig up another 100 where the road is so different than where finished floor is on so many of these properties. But again, I'm going to ask and throw it out, why do we care where that first floor is? We have a limit. And we have that very clear, that we can only have the total height, what is it, 36 feet, 34 feet? 35. 35, well, that's close. I think both sides, kind of like my over-under.
35 feet.
35 feet from grade to the height of the top of the structure, and we passed some language last week or 2 weeks ago that talked about how we're going to measure that.
I was just going to say, so what's grade in the example you just gave, the left side of the house or the exposed basement side of the house?
Anyway. That's the grade, because our ordinance says from the grade.
But which side of that house are you measuring from? I mean, the grade...
Personally, I would measure both sides. If there's a reason that we say 35 feet is it, then if you're 35 feet on the upper side and all of a sudden you've got 45 feet because you did an exposure, that's still beyond our code as far as I'm concerned, because we don't want a structure rising 45 feet out of the ground.
So, I guess the third picture on the right on the first page is kind of nice to my question. What's
Exactly.
the grade on that house?
Well, for me, I would measure at the garage and I'd go up that 35 feet. And then I'd go on either side or on the lake side and I'd still check the 35 feet.
So it's from the lowest point,
For me,
the lowest point.
yeah. If that's our intention as a community to not have a towering structure. At that point, we don't have room for a special exception, but they can always go to ZBA and ask for a variance. But that would be a much tougher nut to crack to go to ZBA and they'd have to have a real reason to be able to do that.
Kathy?
So, I mean, I have no idea how tall my house is, but from the front of the house, it's 2 stories. On the back, it's 3 stories.
35 feet should give you 3 stories.
Okay,
You know, typically in homes, it's 8 to 9 feet to the ceiling, and then a foot or so for the structural between them, and then you go back up, and sometimes you got a gable end on it or whatever. I think, you know, the way it was worded, 35 feet to the average height should give you plenty of room. That's why the ordinance is that way for 3 stories exposed.
okay.
But I think what we're trying to get at is not 4 stories exposed, but nobody's doing that because we have that ordinance. What they're doing is they're elevating and then putting the 35 feet on. That's what's creating the tower effect. And if our ordinance just gets at that elevating, just like we did with landscape ground signs, we didn't change the height of a landscape ground sign. What we said is you can't elevate it unnaturally. And I think that's what we're trying to get at here, isn't it? I'm sorry?
I would agree with you that that's the ultimate goal, is that we don't want towering structures.
Okay.
I think so too. I think the problem is the changing of the grade.
Right.
It isn't the structure itself.
The only caveat I would say, give Plan Commission then some ability to vary it for that example on the right where they changed the grade 8 feet to dig that garage in, but it fits the land really well. And that's just not one they should have to go to ZBA for.
In the right, you mean the
Yeah.
photo on the front here?
Yeah, it's our camera, it is. Here, when they built this house, the old house had a driveway climbing up to the original house. When they tore it down and built this one, they just put the garage underneath the first floor. Worked really well. In their case, they've changed the grade here. They've cut it down. You know, the staff's recommendation was 4 feet. Well, 4 feet isn't close on this one because of what they did. And that's a reasonable thing to do, I believe. But again, even to do that, they would have to come to Plan Commission. The way it would be worded is anything over a 2-foot variance to the grade, they would have to come to Plan Commission.
Existing grade.
Existing grade.
So you're saying the floor of the garage is more than 4 feet above the street?
No, I'm saying they altered the grade. We're not talking streets anymore. We're talking about changing the natural grade. So what they did is the natural grade used to come across here. They've altered the natural grade to dig that garage in. Fits the site really well, but it wouldn't hit the scope of that verbiage that don't, and I don't know if 2 feet's the right number. And then your other comment on there was, well, somebody could go in and do it. Well, it would be cumulative to the lot. In other words, if you varied at 1.5 feet and you came back and wanted to vary a foot, you'd be over your 2.5. You'd only have a 1/2 foot of variance left. It's just like our stormwater ordinances, where you get 20,000 square feet before you have to enact stormwater controls. Well, it's cumulative. You can't add 15,000 square feet this year and another 15 next year. It's cumulative. Then you've reached that total. So our ordinance, then, if we say whatever we pick, if it's 18 inches, 2 feet, whatever it is, it would be a cumulative effect. So from the time that ordinance is passed, any changes over that 2 feet or 18 inches would have to be approved. Because one of your concerns was they could come back and change it 2 feet, change it 2 feet, change it 2 feet. By making it cumulative, you've locked it in.
Other questions? Son?
So you would interpret option number 3 to also include not increases of 2 to 4 feet, but decreases, any change. in
Yeah,
grade.
absolutely, because a decrease could affect the neighbor just as much. I mean, the examples you brought us were mainly building it up, but you could affect the neighbor quite a bit by taking it down severely right next to their property line too. So if we're going to do it, we should probably do it both directions. Most people won't dig themselves in a hole, but, and there might be a good reason. Then come see us. I mean, if that's what we're truly trying to get at, let's just make it something that seems to make sense. It's not burdensome, but if they're going to vary it more than 2 feet, that doesn't happen very often. And then you have to come and just have independent body review it and take a look at it and say, yeah, this makes sense, or oh, we're not liking this. You've got to think about it.
Other thoughts, Sunny?
In looking and comparing option 3 to option 4, if we were to go with option 3 and the site plans come to Plan Commission, to be upheld legally, the standards that the Plan Commission is looking at and the conditions, they need to be very clear, measurable. By the way that they're listed right now, there's no negative impact to adjoining water bodies, and the resulting finished floor elevation does not substantially deviate from character of surrounding properties. Those can be somewhat subjective. Option number 4 doesn't open the Plan Commission up to those things, and it also reduces the burden on a homeowner. So looking at those two things in comparison, what does option 4 not achieve?
You're talking about walls again, and the walls have nothing to do with changing the grade. So we're trying to, and 4, you're trying to tie it into a wall, and I cited a lot of buildings, including homes, and the finished floor doesn't have a lot to do with what you're doing with the grade. I mean, you have to have access, but you change so many things for a finished floor. I mean, the number 1 is basically junk, throw it out. It's just like the first one we did. To say in Monona 2 feet above the crown of the lowest adjoining street, I mean, number 1, you cite a building based on the highest adjoining street, usually not the lowest. And every case is totally different. But we can also have, you said it has to be quantitative to be legal. We're quantitative. We're going to say 2 feet, 18 inches, whatever the commission chooses would be a reasonable grade change without having to be reviewed. So the ordinance itself is, if you change the existing grade by more than 2 feet, then you need to come in and have a look at it. If you're not changing it, because that's what we talked about last week. If you're not going to change the grade much, you're really not impacting the neighbor, you're not impacting all these site things that we're talking about, go ahead. You don't need to go see anybody extra. But if you're going to change it 2 feet, and then when we say the 2 feet, to me, your 1 and 2, your bullet points or your sub-paragraphs, they're just giving an explanation of the ordinance and what it's looking for. They could be in there or not, but those are some of the things we want to look for. That's why we have the 2-foot maximum.
So if number 3 at the beginning got rid of the stuff in the middle that was talked about, and got rid of the indented 1 and 2 because those are really factors that the plan or
yeah,
not.
They're factors. I mean, that's really in writing the ordinance and
what they would be looking at.
Yeah, I think it's helpful for people to see that, but whether it's in the ordinance or it's a footnote or explanation, I think I checked with Bill Cole. I don't know.
So I do have some comments from Bill Cole.
Why don't you hop to those?
So in the language it says a special exception permit may be granted by the Plan Commission. So Bill Cole's issue was with the word may, and that word is a little bit arbitrary and that it should be changed to shall, because under due process the applicant should know exactly what requirements they need to meet in order to be granted a permit. And if they meet conditions 1 and 2, then they shall be able to receive the permit. It shouldn't be left ambiguous. If they meet conditions 1 and 2, then maybe the Plan Commission will grant them a permit. So he wanted to see that word changed to shall.
That's
But
interesting.
you're saying that we will, then they don't need to come to planning commission. If they meet 1 and 2, then they shall get approval, then they
There's
don't,
two
why would they
really-
come here?
They need to show that they meet 1 and 2 in the Plan Commission desires.
We don't have that in the rest of our zoning ordinance. We're not shall grant them a permit. We look at it as conditional use, and we determine whether or not we feel it's very subjective. To be quite honest, our performance zoning code, there are no shalls in that, so I'm not sure why this one has to be a shall. I mean,
Well, it needs to be based on some objective standards, and I think we do have that in our zoning code. We have quantitative standards in Appendix A to guide us on parking
Quantitative and
landscaping.
qualitative, but they're not, mostly qualitative, that we look at all the time here.
Kathy?
I'm going to deviate a little bit. Can you tell me what "to" really means? If I'm going to do something, what do we mean by the character of surrounding properties?
Well, that's what I was just gonna bring up, you know, this whole thing stems, I mean, and actually I don't know this factually, but I'm speculating that this really came as a result of aesthetic problems. And I brought this up before, and everybody's, well, no, this is an aesthetic thing, and I understand it needs to be addressed this way, but it ultimately, I mean, the stormwater, all those issues are very real, but I don't think that's why this has been brought to our attention. It's been brought to our attention for aesthetic purposes, and aesthetics are not something, supposedly, much to my chagrin, that we can't address. And so, it's kind of a can of worms both ways. I mean, there's nothing you're going to say, there truly is nothing that can go in here that would directly resolve the reason this was brought to our attention,
Could I?
unless we're lucky.
Could you
But
still?
I like what-
I'm still waiting for an answer to what "to" mean. What does that mean? How would I know that when I mean, what do I take into consideration when I'm making a decision?
There's no answer to that because it's aesthetic.
Well, I'm waiting for staff to tell me what, since they did it.
Well, I think that's sort of my point as well, is I would, from a staff perspective, encourage something a little bit more objective and quantifiable, measurable, something that doesn't open the plan commission up to all possible interpretations of what character means.
Is there a possibility of a hybrid between the best of 3 and the best of 4? Because I see, or I hear from staff, the desire for number 4 is because it's very cut and dry, and it's very objective driven. And the part of 3 that I'm hearing from the positive parts are the idea of taking the difference between certain things and giving the option to be able to come to this group for some discussion prior to just going straight to the ZBA for an exception from the appeals. That if there was somehow a merging of option 3 and option 4.
Isn't 1 what we are really trying to get at? We don't want a negative impact on the water or on the adjacent properties? Isn't that what we're trying to get at?
I don't think so. I think it went back to what you said, is we want to try to limit the towering, you know, 3-story, 4-story.
Well, I didn't say it, she said, we're just trying to figure out a way to do it.
But I think
I
that
really-
causes a negative impact on people, whether it is, I mean, I look at the house, I mean, how much right do you have to totally block somebody's sun? How high do you have to, I mean, in Japan, that's an issue with some places, and if you totally block views and suns because you're close and because you're 4 stories high, is that acceptable? Which I think was part of the complaint of the people down there. Wasn't just water runoff, but it was the blockage of constantly being in a shadow. To me, that's a negative impact.
Dale?
Just being bigger than the whole rest of the area.
I think that with the topography around here, I think Chris's comments to relating to existing grade is spot on. And all of these tie into foundation walls. And I don't think they can, because, I mean, I just think that's perfect to say that you need to be within 2 feet of existing grade. I mean, I think it's fabulous because it covers all the different scenarios around Monona. So after that, it's just a matter of when do they need to come to planning commission?
And for what reasons would we make an exception?
Well, Sonia's saying
Yeah.
that we shall make an exception based on, or the city attorney or.
Well, and I think that's the point that staff's making, that if if we are giving that ability to come to this body, we need to give some criteria, is what I'm hearing. And whatever criteria that we lay out there, she's relaying the comment from our attorney that lay it out in a way that an applicant knows what it is that they're coming here to prove. And if they're able to do that, then we need to give them that leeway.
Well, there's some criteria, but they're not, but you can't, I mean, you don't say in advance that you shall, I mean, you don't do that with a variance. I mean, someone goes in, I mean, you don't do that for anything. That's the way I think it should be. It just doesn't happen to be that way.
Go for it.
It's a permitted use, and the requirements can't be left completely open-ended. A homeowner can't come in and say, well, I have no idea what it's going to take for me to be able to get a permit to build my house. We'll wait and see what the plan commission says. That doesn't meet the due process test of articulating the requirements and having the standards reasonably further a legitimate government purpose.
Kathy's going to get sorted out there, Brian.
Oh,
It's all right,
yeah.
I get so. I don't like the term shall, and I don't think it's necessary. What I will say is, we cannot absolutely guarantee that somebody isn't going to disagree with our decision. And I don't want to be bound by all of this stuff, because in my 400 years on the Plan Commission, we have had maybe 395.
Cumulative.
We have had incredible judgment, good taste, and nobody has ever taken us to court. And I'm willing to take that risk, just so as not to use the word shall, because I think it's important that we have the flexibility that maybe we will and maybe we won't. And I'm looking at the attorney who hasn't fallen out of his chair yet. But do you have comments, Griff, about?
I agree with that. I don't think shall is required either. I think if we have some kind of a standard, then the question of whether it meets the standard is up to this body. And I think we can continue the May. I was just listening to the discussion. Maybe instead of saying the following conditions, just go on to that there's no negative impact to the adjoining water bodies or adjoining parcels as a result of stormwater runoff or other factors.
Just period.
Just period.
Just period.
Or period.
Cut out the stormwater part.
Yeah. I mean, stormwater would be one major factor we'd look at.
Sure.
And maybe, as we go through these, we may have to make a modification or two. But I think that we want to leave it up to the good judgment and common sense of this body to do the right things, because they always have.
So for a small clarification on item 3, right now it has the numbers of 2 feet and then the numbers at the bottom for 4 feet. And if I follow correctly, the item of the one on the right where they dug out, that one wouldn't be able to be approved here. That would have to be approved at ZBA.
Well, I think you have to increase the 4 feet. There was an 8 feet in the original one, wasn't
We've talked about it. We've talked about a lot of different things, but I agree. I think to allow us to go up to 8 feet for demonstrated cases that we're looking at would seem to be a reasonable thing.
That makes sense, because that's exactly what this scenario would have been.
Right, and you know, to say it's arbitrary, we have cases we're looking at. We're saying, hey, we want to be able to allow this. We're not allowing somebody to dig out 8 feet and undermine their neighbor's footing. We're saying where they're putting this garage in because it suits the lot, and that's an allowable case. But I agree with Griff that we make the changes we talked about, get rid of 2 altogether, and instead of having one, and gives me an explanation after that they can grant it if there's no negative impact to the adjoining water bodies or adjacent parcels. It could be that clean.
All right, so...
And then certainly the last paragraph, they should not prohibit compliance with floodplain development regulations. Gotta get that out.
And it changed to 8 feet down at the bottom?
I think so, but you know, we're not going to vote on it tonight, right?
No.
I think these are good things to take in and chew on, go back and let staff talk to other staff members, talk to Bill Cole again, you know, relay it all. We don't have to do it tonight.
No.
So I've gotten the notes of what the changes would be to option number 3. I just want to talk a little bit more about option number 4 and make sure I'm understanding what the concerns are with it. I, in thinking about option number 4, tried to think of situations where a variance would be needed for if you did not meet, you could not meet number 1, 2, and 3. And I couldn't think of any reason. You should be able to meet the greater of adjoining street, the elevation of the previous structure, which I think is what we're trying to achieve, or the average of elevations of the adjacent homes. And what Chris mentioned is that the problem is that it's specifically tying to the foundation walls. So maybe I'm not understanding exactly, maybe I'm not clear what the definition of finished grade is. This one talks about first floor elevation at the front of the structure, and that's different than where you're measuring height from. So if you're talking about where the first floor is in relation to the street, or the previous structure's elevation, or the average elevation, I think that meets all of the objections that we've had about some of these projects that are out of character.
It doesn't. The first floor doesn't necessarily relate to grade when you're rebuilding. Most of the homes that are here in Monona are old. The ones that are getting rebuilt, they're 40, 50, 60 years old, okay? And back then, it was really difficult and expensive to move dirt. So you put it right where it is, you didn't move dirt. Now somebody coming in today, they might decide that, well, A, their neighbor might have bedrock or water and have a really shallow basement, so they don't want to have that. So they're going to raise their floor up, but then they're still limited by our maximum from grade. If we don't change grade, they have that limit. We tied them in. If they can't raise the grade, then they can't raise that peak anymore. But they may choose to put a ranch in with half exposure, so that they're not into the water, they're not into the bedrock. That wouldn't work here. There's a lot of cases where it wouldn't work because you're trying to tie the finished floor in, and what we're talking about is grade, and they are different. And each building gets cited differently. A lot of times they're the same, but sometimes there's a reason to do it differently.
Wouldn't the floor of an exposure, or the lowest point of an exposure, or the garage floor in the photo that we've been talking about, those aren't the points of measurement that we'd be going from? We'd be going from the first floor.
No, you measure from the exposure. If you're talking about 35 feet, you'd measure from the exposure.
In defining the height of the structure.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
But in this definition for looking at grading requirements, I've written it to the first floor.
Right,
elevation.
which the first floor doesn't, that's the wrong thing to tie it in, and we got to tie in grades, because the example I just gave you, the first floor could be 4 feet above the adjacent properties. I could use an example where I have a 2-story on each side, and I want a ranch. And I brought mine up a little bit, I exposed half of the lower level, so I'm 4 feet out of the ground, and my roof's still below both neighbors. So, I mean, I haven't done anything to hurt anybody, yet I wouldn't pass under this ordinance, because you tied it into first floor versus grade. And what we're really worried about, if I understand all this, what we've looked at, these examples, all the ones you brought, they've changed the grade. And that has been the big nut. We can't change, if you've got a ranch on each side and somebody wants to put a 2-story in there, we can't change that, and they're going to be taller than you, and that's just the way it's going to be, and I don't think we have the right to change something like that. But that's where our other ordinance that we already talked about, that 35 feet, comes into play, is there's a maximum, you can only go so high. But grade is grade. Grade's different than where the first floor is going to be.
Is it tied into the 35 feet? Is it written that way, that it's the lowest point of exposure?
Well, we need to relook at it. Once we do this, we need to relook at it to make sure.
It's currently the height is measured from the mean ground level at the front of the structure. So in that house with the excavated down for the garage, it would be the average of the grade and between the natural grade and the lowest point of the garage.
That's pretty generous.
Yeah.
And in Kathy's example, you could have a 3-story house in the front and a 4-story house in the back. I don't think that's our intent. If it's the mean of the front, then we should take another look at that.
We'll have to save that discussion for another day.
Yeah.
Plus, accept it or not, the split level is going to be coming back.
Oh, sure.
And
That changes all of it, doesn't it?
it changes all of it, and it makes measuring from first floor impossible.
Not if it's the highest, the top of the highest
Highest
foundation.
finished foundation
That's a
wall.
specific point. But I guess it's a moot point if we're not talking about relating to grade.
Yeah.
We're related to grade, just not the first floor. The first floor can vary.
So what I'm hearing through the discussion is it'd be good for us to be able to go back, make some revisions. Option 3, it sounds like staff has still some commitment to option 4, some pieces of it that are desirable. And I wonder if a rework of those two with some additional comments to bring back to this group.
Right.
Kathy?
I don't, if staff didn't like the 1, 2, and 3, why did she give them to us as an option? And if we picked 3, why are we still working on 4?
So what I'm hearing is there are concerns on the current 3, but with some of the changes that might be improved, but we want to gather some additional feedback from the attorney on some of the may or shall, although we've made some discussions on it that I heard from at least one member that having some feedback for this group to chew on would be helpful. The reason that I would want staff to re-look at the potential of option 4 has not to do with the specific language there, but if there are pieces in option 4 that are desirable, are there ways to bring it back to have a different discussion, not related to first floor, but related to grade with the specifics on items 1 and 2 below?
And my question would be, if staff prefers 4 to 3, what is it about 3 that staff doesn't like, and can you incorporate something from 4 into 3 instead of looking at, that would be my question.
And that's what I'll look at, and just, my issues with number 3 is that I'd like to reduce the burden of homeowners coming to Planning Commission for review.
Well, then you don't want 4, because 4 would be horrible. I don't mean to be mean, but 4 is all about where the finished floor is. All of 4 talks
I'll
about
look
where
at
the
that.
finished floor is, and that's the problem, is we can't do it based on finished floor.
And that's where I think taking option 3 and 4 in this discussion might be able to come back with either a revised 3 and 4 or a revised
Hybrid is the
5.
word you're looking for.
Yes, hybrid. There might be some electric fuel in there somewhere. So. Sandy, do you have any specific questions regarding that would be helpful?
I got the direction on 3 and the concerns on 4, so I'll look at those, and I'll include impervious surface as well as a separate item. And the other item, I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, the city council. The city council would like us to bring back the issue of short-term rentals, and I reported on that 1 or 2 meetings ago. My interpretation of the use of short-term rentals in a single-family home, something like Airbnb and vacation rentals by owner. Got some direction from the city attorney on that, and the city council would like us to take a little bit deeper look at that.
So that's a serious issue in Monona. I mean, being the tourist destination that it is.
I believe there are a few that are currently operating in Monona, according to the Airbnb website. I have not received any complaints. My interpretation of the single-family zoning code is a little bit unclear. It's a little bit ambiguous. It's not expressly prohibited in the zoning code, so I've relied my interpretation on different definitions in different parts of the code. The city attorney pointed to a case study from Cedarburg where Cedarburg lost relying on a similar interpretation. So the desire of council is to have the Plan Commission make a policy decision, should it be permitted or should it be prohibited, and then clarifying the ordinance accordingly.
Should be lively. Chris?
Could we get an opinion then, is there a way for us to craft our ordinance such that if it's being occupied for less than a number of days, it's considered a hotel room, so to speak? There'd be different language, but I mean, that's really what circumventing is, hotel rooms, right? So is there a way that we can craft an ordinance that says, we're not prohibiting it, we're just saying, hey, what it really is short-term rental is the same as what our hotels are, we're going to treat it the same as a hotel. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, we've looked at examples varying on different lengths of stay.
It's kind of like the number of garage sales you can have.
Well, and it's like, how many houses do we have where we have rentals and single families?
And rentals in single families are allowed.
Right.
The issue is the short-term nature of them. There are different zoning issues.
I'm not talking about renting a house. I'm talking about having an apartment in a house that people rent. Which
Right,
goes,
and that is
Second
a little
space.
bit of a separate issue. You're allowed to rent a room, but if you have a single-family home that's been effectively divided into 2 separate units with 2 separate entrances, 2 separate cooking areas, and the people living in those units are operating as separate families, then that is not allowed either.
well, that goes on all the time.
And that's a little bit of a separate issue than short-term rental, but.
All right, should be lively. Next couple meetings, woo. All right, so we'll close out that item for tonight's discussion, and we'll keep it as unfinished business. With those modifications, we'll come back and discuss a little bit more next meeting. And item 7A, any other staff reports regarding development project proposals?
So we'll have those code sections at the next meeting and Cozy Home second read, and we'll also have a pre-hearing conference on Taco Bell architecture. And I mentioned this also at the previous meeting, that the Pier 37 architectural standards require certain things like the sloped roofs and I think earth tones. A lot of Taco Bells are being remodeled to their new corporate prototype with flat parapet walls, metal, use of purple, so they want to look at how they can incorporate some of those newer prototype architectural designs into what we currently have at Pier 37.
I will not be at the next meeting. I'll be in San Francisco.
Oof. Enjoy. All right, and so it's the 24th and the 14th. Dale, did you have a question?
Well, I'm sorry, so I'm not finished.
I'm done.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to expand a little bit on that conversation regarding redevelopment that I brought up earlier. Kathy, you used the example, understandably, that, well, you know, who knows when redevelopment is going to happen down here when CDA is looking to address the other end of Monona Drive. And so I think it's important to bring to people's attention that we're dropping the ball on that end of Monona Drive as well. We let in a blighted block up there, 2 buildings came up for sale. CDA had an option, and that was let go, and that building has since been purchased, and some very, very weak facade improvements, and I'm being generous, are being made to the building, and we've got some tenants going in there. So my point is,
Are you listening, Mary? Mary's on the CDA.
oh, okay. So I guess what I'm looking at is that when are we going to start being aggressive about the redevelopment of Monona Drive? And I think a lot of this facade improvements to some of these buildings are just postponing that. And like I said before, then we're not getting the best use out of the property, and I don't think we're filling the obligation to the community or to the tax base. And so 30 years is a long time.
I mean, I shouldn't speak because I'm not in the council anymore, but what I'll tell you is that in fairness to the taxpayers, we have the biggest bucks in the Triangle area, and we have a limited staff, don't we, Sonny, to work on this, and I think that they are putting tons and tons and tons of time into trying to make that project successful. And so you're right, we're not doing the drive, but and Sonny can better answer this than I can, but I think that's where all the effort is going these days, or most of it. Is that a fair statement?
As far as proactive purchasing of properties and doing some proactive advanced planning, yes, those dollars are going into the riverfront. But
and the effort to find developers and do stuff.
That doesn't mean efforts in other parts of the city staff either. We're talking to developers and property owners and looking at plans all the time. It's just on the north end of Monona Drive, the city hasn't taken a proactive approach, and they've decided to leave it up to the private market. As far as a comment on redevelopment, it is a CDA issue to determine what kind of substantial improvements can be made to buildings in redevelopment districts. That doesn't mean it's inappropriate for the Plan Commission to comment on it, and I can relay those issues to the CDA. But there is a statute that is in all of our redevelopment districts that says that no new construction, substantial remodeling, additions, structural alterations, and things like that they're prohibited unless the city council approves them on buildings in redevelopment districts. So that is the mechanism that would be used to prevent substantial improvements being made to buildings that are, per the plans, intended to be redeveloped.
Yeah, and I guess I'm speaking to the fact that I think maybe, and we all know I'm new to the community and the commission, so I don't mean to speak out of turn, but I think that's exactly what I'm speaking to, is that I question whether maybe that vehicle's working. And I clearly know what's gone into the triangle, and the amount of work has been tremendous, and the city and Sonia have done it, and the CDA have done a great job with that. There's no question about it. But that's kind of one big home run for Monona, which will be fabulous when it happens. And I think I've mentioned to Sonia in the past, I think it has merit to consider some baby steps on Monona Drive to start to show the development community that we are moving forward with a more contemporary, more urban planning design up and down Monona Drive, and I think that might even draw interest to the triangle if there were some projects happening. And I struggle. I mean, I'm a small businessman. I always have been. So I so respect what people are doing when they come in and buy a building, and want to clean it up. But whether that's in the best interest of Monona, I guess I consider the question.
So we might have to curb this as an ongoing discussion unless we're going to put it on a future agenda, but do you have a follow-up?
I just wanted to state, I'm a huge fan of our facade grant program. I think it's great. I think redevelopment I'd love to see, but when we're talking redevelopment, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to redevelop properties. I don't think our $10,000 facade grant program stops that. I just think it's neat when these people that are somewhere and they want to stay and they want to be here, in this case they bought a building and want to be here and fix it up and spend a little money fixing it up. I think it's awesome. I think it's great, and I think some of them have been less than great, but some of them have really improved places. So I'm a big fan for what I consider a very relatively small investment by the city.
And the other thing that the council, when we did the facade grant, it's wonderful to do all these great things and give TIF money to new businesses who are coming in, but you can't forget the businesses that have been here and have been the backbone on the drive for a long time. And they maybe can't afford their businesses, they can't afford new buildings, but they can afford to improve what they have, and it's a partnership with existing businesses, I think, is what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Can I, one last thing about, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with your comments that we certainly want to advance development first. But I'm with Chris. I think this facade program is really more a short-term kind of thing. It'll deal with the immediate situation, and that in the long term, the kind of money and the kind of energy that's going to be required for the big development projects, it's not going to impact it that much. That's fine.
All right, we're starting to cross over to the point of making a discussion item for a future agenda item, so we'll hold it there so we don't.
Just a facade
question that we can take
for staff. Is there two questions there?
Oh.
One, well, three. But
oh my God, it's got a subpart A and B.
Does the grant go out when the project is complete?
Yeah, it's dispersed as a reimbursement after inspection, making sure that they've completed the project according to approved plans.
Okay. I was just kidding about 2 and 3.
Oh. All right, any other questions about future development projects?
Yeah, I know.
All right, seeing none.
Move adjournment.
In a second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?